Hello and welcome. It is I, Iron Raven, back yet again with another new topic of discussion. Now I actually have a little bit of a this little ring light here I'm kind of experimenting with and just giving that a shot, and I figured, oh, the red fits rather well, doesn't it? Anyway, no one cares about that, or probably this video, more than likely. Anyway, yes. So, on to the topic at hand. Now, I've done a couple of videos in the past discussing my fandom for the James Bond franchise and whatnot, and how I kind of got started in that. It really started with Casino Royale, and, went back and watched all the movies beforehand and all of that, and if not for that movie, I wouldn't have learned to play poker, and just, yeah, the rest is history. I love the franchise. Where it goes from here, from where we find ourselves, who the hell knows? But regardless, we have quite a history with this franchise. It's one of the biggest franchises out there, one of the most unique, just because it spanned several decades with several different actors, and it's a fairly rinse and repeat formula, but has managed to keep itself relevant after all this time, which is very unique for something like this. Of course, based off the novels from Ian Fleming. So if not for him, we wouldn't even have this. But the films themselves are very much their own entity for sure. They definitely focus more on like gadgets and whatnot, more so than probably what the books do themselves. But this video is mostly just kind of breaking down all the Bonds themselves and who is really the best, or some of the better ones, who are maybe some of the worst if there are any. So just a little fun topic here, so I'll just get right to it. Now let's just start at the beginning here. Now with Sean Connery. Now Sean Connery, you can't take away from him. He is the one who initiated, Bond on the big screen. He is that guy. He was larger than life when you saw him as his character. He was the jack of all trades. He had the suaveness. He had the cool factor. He had the badassery to go along with it. He just had it all going for him. And so as far as Sean Connery, yeah, is for the most part, he is a very much a perfect Bond, especially for, that 60s era, if you will. So a lot of people would definitely think like, okay, well, what's Bond like in the books? Who's truly the definitive Bond? There's definitely varying factors, and each actor brings their own unique traits to the character, which is what makes it interesting. So it's not necessarily that all Bonds have to be the perfect ideal Bond, but can they create and bring to life their own variation of James Bond, like have most of the traits, but just have that one little extra spark, that one trait that sticks out more than the others. And so for the most part, I will say that I feel like most of the Bonds do that. There's really only one exception that doesn't really quite do that. But for the most part, I enjoy everyone as James Bond. Like, everyone has a little something different. And for me, Sean Connery is certainly up there, if not the number one. He just defied it, and as far as that era, he just fits so damn well. And like I said, there's just really next to no negatives you can say about his performance as that character. He defied it for what it is for all future generations of that. So you can't really take anything away from the man. Now, on the George Lazenby. Now, this one is very interesting in particular because, well, it's a one-off film for him. Of course, Sean Connery made a brief return shortly after the fact, before Roger Moore came along. And so, yeah, there was a lot of controversy with this choice and everything, and stuff like behind the scenes and filming with this guy and how it all came to be. And yeah, it's pretty easy to say that this guy is pretty much at the bottom of the list as far as the James Bonds go. He doesn't really come across particularly badass. He's fairly cool in some ways, but not the greatest. Now, what I will say is that as far as his film, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, what allows him to stand out a bit more is the plot line, and knowing how important this is as far as the lore of James Bond, and what makes him that character, and what makes him more sort of stone cold when it comes to certain things, and keep himself closed off from getting too personal with people. And that is the travesty of his would-be wife in this film, Tracy Bond, who, of course, by the end of that film, she gets killed off. But what gives him something more to work with is knowing that you have that dynamic between the two of them, those two actors, because she is actually quite fantastic in this film, and I feel like she actually helps Lazenby that much more. and gives them a little bit more to work with. Their dynamic works because it's just a nice, kind of like sweet connection that they have. So I feel like that gives Lazenby a lot more. If not for that element, if it was just like another one-off adventure with not a whole lot of interesting ties or layers, so to speak of, then it would definitely be that much more forgettable. But he happens to be in a very key film as far as the lore of this character. So that allows him to have a little bit more to work with. But all in all, though, still, and knowing it's just one film as well, I don't think a second film probably really would have changed much. But knowing, you only get the one film to really kind of get a feel for him, and just knowing it wasn't that great for him to begin with, that definitely puts him at the bottom. Now on to Roger Moore. Now the Roger Moore era is of course known as the very goofy era. They kind of go back and forth a little bit. Live and Let Die start off pretty strong, and then you get The Man with the Golden Gun, which definitely falls into a more goofier tone. You get The Spy Who Loved Me, which kind of falls a little bit more into like the basic James Bond formula, not too heavy-handed as far as the comedy goes per se. And then you get Moonraker, which kind of goes over the top again, and then For Your Eyes Only, which goes back to a bit more of a serious tone. So there's a bit of a back and forth here. Now, despite a more goofier tone, and for some, they may either love or hate him, but as far as Roger Moore, he definitely feels like a version of James Bond. Anytime he's on screen, I don't ever think that this guy doesn't feel like James Bond to me. Where Sean Connery was basically an agent who happened to be a playboy, Roger Moore feels like a playboy who happens to be an agent. That's the best way to probably describe these variations of the character. Because Roger Moore is just so damn suave and cool to where it's like, I can't not like this guy. He is just oozing charisma when he's on screen. He may not be the most badass. He doesn't come across the most hardened. There's definitely certain times in his run of films where he gets a little bit more hardened, if you will, and you get a little bit more of a serious tone with them, which works in their own right. But for the most part, he's just cool as hell, and there's just no one else like him. I feel like he actually outcools Sean Connery as far as that's concerned, with this smug ass smile, and just he's just such a joy to watch. You can't help but smile anytime Roger Moore is on screen just doing his thing. He is just that cool. So he may not be the most badass and ideal Bond per se, but he certainly does bring his own flavor to it, and he's just as iconic as Sean Connery for that reason alone, in my opinion at least. Now on to Timothy Dalton. Now of course at the time Timothy Dalton was very much underrated and a bit underappreciated. As time has gone on, he's gotten more of like a cult following, if you will, a little bit more of an appreciation because people realize it's like, more darker James Bond, of course, makes sense and ties more closer in with those earlier Ian Fleming novels. For me, I do feel like that Timothy Dalton is definitely, I say he for sure rings the most true to what you would envision Ian Fleming's Bond to be. I feel like he certainly does, especially kind of being in that middle portion of the franchise, the transition from the 60s and 70s onto the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. I feel like he definitely works. What he tried to definitely shift the tone into a little bit more serious. Like The Living Daylights is not super gadget heavy. It feels more espionage in a sense. The plot of The Living Daylights is a little convoluted in ways, but it definitely rings more like an actual spy type of thriller in certain aspects. And I do feel like that Timothy Dalton is a very, very good James Bond. Over time, like the more and more as I watch his films, he starts to become more of like my favorite. And overall, he might just be my favorite in certain aspects. It's a shame he never got to do a second or a third or fourth film. But for the pair of films that we do get, I personally really liked License to Kill once I first saw it. Living Daylights didn't do much for me when I first saw it, but over time, the more I've watched it, the more I've come to appreciate that more, even though I actually did like his performance from the start. But Timothy Dalton, he certainly is underappreciated. He is a very good actor and a very good James Bond, and he certainly does deserve the credit, most certainly does. He just didn't quite get a fair shake, because I know coming off the Roger Moore films especially, it must have been very jarring for audiences to be like, well, this is not what we're used to. This is not James Bond. Where's the fun? Where's all this stuff? Where's the quips? They're not out there as much. And so I can kind of understand that. For the time, you can understand the audience's reaction, but, nowadays you look back and you realize it's like, okay, it kind of made sense for that character and for his interpretation. It did very well because I know he definitely tried to look towards the books and to try to bring that character to life how he saw fit. So definitely underrated. Now Pierce Brosnan. This was the big return for a lot of people. GoldenEye was a huge hit back in '95, and of course not just the movie itself, but you had the video game for the N64, which was definitely a big like revitalization for first-person shooters and whatnot. So it had big success on two different accounts there. And Pierce Brosnan, yeah, I mean he was definitely the perfect modern Bond for the '90s, absolutely. Now I will say that I feel like his following films. Now I do like Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough, fine enough, but yeah, they don't quite live up to what GoldenEye was. Like GoldenEye absolutely just nailed all aspects. I feel like that was where they were firing on all cylinders. They had a great solid Bond. You had Judi Dench coming in as M, which yeah, a strong female actually was replaced as a male version of that, and that's one of the prime examples of like, yeah, how you can actually do that and do it right and not just do it for the sake of doing it and just give you terrible writing. It's like, no, they had a great dynamic throughout their run and the Craig run, where eventually it just almost became like a mother-son relationship where they just constantly give each other shit, but they kind of had a certain respect for one another. And so, yeah, it was a really good, solid start for a new Bond. Absolutely. Martin Campbell directing, and of course he did Casino Royale. So two times where Martin Campbell actually helped revitalize the franchise and showed just what he was capable of. But yeah, like especially Die Another Day, an absolute cheese fest for sure, but it can still be a fun watch. But yeah, the films didn't quite live up to what his potential Bond could have been. But all in all, you still have to take into account like what he gave, especially with that GoldenEye film. It absolutely works, and he is, in his own right, a perfect Bond for sure. Now, when it comes to Daniel Craig, now if this was before I was really in tune with the franchise, of course, a lot of people gave criticism because he was blonde-haired, and blue-eyed, and it's just like, James Bond, what the hell is this? You can't do this. And sure enough, once the film came out, it silenced a lot of critics for him. And some people still don't really like Daniel Craig, which I can kind of understand. His run is kind of hit or miss, but then again, that's kind of pretty much all the actors. You know, they have, maybe one really great film, not so great film, and then kind of, it kind of goes on that way. But I do feel like he is a very solid James Bond, especially for his initial film, where I feel like, again, like GoldenEye, things were just kind of firing on all cylinders. And I could argue this is the best of the franchise, mostly because it obviously has stronger writing. It has more layers than what your atypical Bond film usually gets you. You have a very strong villain, Mads Mikkelsen as Le Chiffre, and so that dynamic between the two of them just playing a poker game. This film actually managed to make poker exciting, which is why I actually bothered to learn it at the time, because that film just had that much of an impact on me. And so, yeah, I became a poker fan after that. And not to mention Ava Green, which after this film, I also became a big fan of hers. I'm like, not only is she a very beautiful woman, but she is a damn good actress. She can elevate the most mediocre film, absolutely. I mean, if you've ever seen Sin City, A Dame to Kill For, or 300 Rise of an Empire, fairly mediocre films, but her villainous nature in those films absolutely elevates. She is a damn good actress. And so, again, it plays off very well with Daniel Craig's Bond, where you just get a little bit more, not as matured Bond, but so you get a little bit more, like a little bit of fun with him, but also when he has to be serious and all that. It just has a great balance. I feel like it's a near perfect film, like I would describe it, close to being like a Batman Begins or Dark Knight as far as the James Bond franchise goes. That's what it feels like to me. And Skyfall is another really solid entry that definitely adds a lot of layers to the character. And I feel like these two films in particular definitely defy his performance more than any of them. And so therefore I give him credit as far as that goes. So they kind of wrap this up here. Where I stand as far as the best James Bond, it's very tricky to say who is truly the best, because my mindset could definitely change as years go on, for sure. I mean, they definitely have a bit, as I've watched the films and grown up with them more and this and that. But as far as like the best James Bonds, I would definitely say Sean Connery for sure, and my next one would probably be Timothy Dalton. Absolutely, I do feel like that despite criticisms of his films or whatever have you, I definitely feel like that he defies a lot of great elements of Bond. He strikes a really good balance of being like somewhat stoic and hardened, if you will, but at the same time knows where to kind of, let loose a little bit, where you can actually kind of have fun with his Bond. He just has the right balance, I feel, and I feel like that there was a lot of like missed chances for his Bond in his run because again, the way audiences reacted, and just because he definitely could have had another like one or two films to really have solidified himself as being a truly solid James Bond. And yet, despite only having those couple of films, I feel like he still stands out quite a bit above the rest. But I can always go back and watch the older films from like the Sean Connery era through the Dalton era in particularly and have the most fun. Like I said, I can easily have a good old time with Roger Moore. I enjoy watching Roger Moore as much as any other Bond. But as far as who are the two most defining Bonds, if you will, I would say Connery and Dalton in their own right are the two better overall Bonds of the franchise, despite Casino Royale being perhaps my favorite film of the franchise, or stuff like that. So like I said, there's a lot of layers that kind of go into that decision, but all in all, I feel like those two definitely defy the character the best. But that's just my opinion. Like I said, that could easily shift just maybe a little bit over time. But anyway, yes, just this little James Bond topic, just seeing who is truly the best and who works and who doesn't. Like I said, it's not always about being the ideal Bond, but can you bring your own version of Bond to life? Can you defy yourself as James Bond in your own unique way is really what it comes down to. And I feel like for the most part, everyone succeeds. Lazenby, like I said, falls a little short, but then again, like I said, I consider that a win for the franchise. Win for me personally. I feel like everyone works well in their own right. So yeah, just to wrap up this video now, thank you very much for watching. If you did, I am Iron Raven, and I am out.